All right. Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We are going to be talking today with Martin Block about the Special Olympics and about disability issues in general. So I thought we would start, Marty, just by talking about what the Special Olympics are.
Sure.
I think we've probably all heard about it, but when did they get started? What's their function? What are they, basically?
Sure. Okay. So first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to talk about something I'm very passionate about. So Special Olympics, many of you know the Kennedy family. I'm assuming Eunice Kennedy Shriver was the sister to Edward Kennedy and John Kennedy. And she decided back in the mid and early 60s to have a camp for children with disabilities in her backyard in Maryland. And that's basically the origins of Special Olympics. Then in 1968, the first international games, international was Canada and the US, had games in Chicago. And so since 1968, Special Olympics has been around. Today, there are over 5 million athletes representing 200 countries around the world. I was just in Abu Dhabi at a meeting, and there are people from Africa and Asia and just pretty much everywhere around the world who do Special Olympics. So it's quite a large program. It's the largest sports program for children and adults with disabilities in the world. And we do serve children now as young as 2. It used to be 8 and older for competition, but now they have a young children's program, kind of a precursor. But it goes up to people in their 80s and 90s who still compete. So it's a wonderful program.
How do you qualify to participate in the Special Olympics?
So you need to have an intellectual disability. Autism is also counted as more of a broad developmental disability. If your main disability is a visual impairment or a physical disability, there's Paralympics, a different sports track, so it's really for intellectual disability and autism.
And how did you get involved in this work? Why is it so important to you?
So like a lot of people, my first experience was when I was in college. I volunteered. And then my first job was up in Northern Virginia at a special school for children with disabilities. My wife, wasn't my wife at the time, was a special ed teacher. I was the physical education teacher. And as part of being the phys ed teacher, I was head of Special Olympics and just really enjoyed it. And then when I moved here, I have 2 daughters. My oldest daughter was in Albemarle High School, and you do community service. And I've always done Special Olympics and enjoyed it. And I went to the head of Special Olympics and said, my daughter plays volleyball. She'd love to volunteer for volleyball. Do you have a program? He goes, no, but why don't you do it? Okay. So I started volleyball Special Olympics and later did tennis. I still coach those right now.
And what's that experience like, coaching individuals with intellectual disabilities? How has that impacted you? What's that experience like?
So the first word that comes to my mind is fun. It's just something that's really fun to do. I really enjoy the athletes we have. Most of the ones we have are adults, young adults, but it's just a really fun experience. The challenge is trying to figure out how to get them to understand what you want them to do. It's the language, the communication piece, the how do I get my body into the right position type of a thing. So that's a fun challenge. You don't seem to understand what I mean by getting my hands ready here. Let me help you. That's the fun challenge.
So in a way, it challenges you to find new forms to communicate. You can't simply just say, this is what I want you to do necessarily.
Yeah.
But you've got to be creative in how you coach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I leave those situations, and I talk to my students who I train to work with children with disabilities to leave those situations when you're frustrated, thinking to yourself, okay, what did I not do correctly? As opposed to saying, the child is not doing this correctly. I'm not getting through to the child. What do I gotta fix?
Yeah. That's really interesting. We had the UVA men's tennis coach here a couple of weeks ago, and he said something very similar to that too. The idea that the role of the coach is to think about, well, how can I communicate better? How can I coach better, right? So if a player doesn't live up to expectations or whatever, rather than saying, well, where's the fault with that individual? Where's the problem? Thinking about what might I have missed? Seems like that maybe is a nugget of wisdom in coaching. What other benefits for maybe our society, but also certainly for the people who participate in the Special Olympics. What sort of other benefits do they provide?
So from societal perspective, I know Mrs. Shriver always talked about getting these people with intellectual disabilities out of the closet, so to speak, and into society. You know, people were hidden away, things like that. And so she wanted to become more part of the mainstream, you know, and accepted. Yeah. So I think that's a big thing from a societal perspective. When you see somebody who has an intellectual disability playing basketball or tennis or doing something, you know, where other people do, you go, wow, maybe that person isn't as different as I thought they were. So I think that could be from the societal perspective. From the individual perspective, there's the social aspects of being around friends who have disabilities, interacting with people without disabilities. A lot more integrated sports going on now in Special Olympics. So I think that the health benefits, there's a lot of research that people with intellectual disabilities are prone to obesity and sedentary lifestyle. So Special Olympics really prevents that. So I think that's a healthy lifestyle is important as well.
Do you think that since the Special Olympics began, we've become more inclusive of people with intellectual disability?
I think so. I do. I do. I mean, there's still bullying that goes around. There was a big campaign, Special Olympics started several years ago, about spread the word, to end the word, the R word. You know, the term retarded became kind of a very negative connotation. So, you know, are we still seeing bullying? Are we still seeing, you know, misuse of language? Ableism is something I've been studying a little bit lately. You know, do we still value people who are able-bodied versus those who are disabled? You know, we do. So we still have a way to go, but we're doing better. Special Olympics is a really big part of how we're making these changes.
Yeah. I know for many people, the foundation, intellectual, theological foundation for their work with people with disabilities goes back to Genesis and the idea that we're all made in the image of God, right? It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what your background is or your abilities in various ways. It's not contingent on something you've achieved or something you have, right? It's simply built into the very nature of who you are. How do you personally think about people with disabilities vis-a-vis others? How do you think about, you know, why it's important to include people with intellectual disabilities in activities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never liked this idea of excluding and being exclusive. You know, my wife and I have always talked about this. You know, the whole idea of people who have and have not, and you belong and you don't belong, that whole idea just doesn't really jive with us. So I think this idea of inclusion and accepting people, I think is just so important and deep down part of our ethos. Now, my wife and I worked at special schools, and it doesn't mean that those are bad things to separate people sometimes. You know, Special Olympics does a lot of more inclusive activities, but they also have separate, you know, tennis teams, separate volleyball teams. So that still can be inclusive by allowing them to come and participate in these sports and things like that. But yeah, the whole idea of excluding people and saying, no, you're not good enough, that has always bothered my wife and I. And so I think it's important with Special Olympics to say, no, you're not less than, and you shouldn't be excluded. You should be, you know, valued and part of society and be allowed to do these sports and things like that. I think that's what Mrs. Shriver always said, is sports is such a normalizing activity. You know, Special Olympics now, the last games were in Germany, the World Games back in the summer of 2023. ESPN was showing them. I mean, how normalized is that? You know, you watch CNN, there's stories about Special Olympics. So it's become much more of a normalized thing when you see people with disabilities. And I know with my daughters growing up in Albemarle High School, there were, you know, kids with disabilities around, so it wasn't so different than when you and I were growing up and they were really segregated. You know? Yeah.
Well, you know, you mentioned how for you and your wife, inclusion is an important part of your ethos. But I think it probably has to be said that, you know, in our society, there is a lot of exclusion, not just about issues around disabilities, but in general, we have this kind of tribalistic quality, right? We want to divide people up. How do you think, in general, we should go about breaking down barriers? obviously Special Olympics is part of that, but what other things do you think, and I know you're passionate about this, that we ought to be doing as a society to come together?
That's a bigger question than I'm equipped to answer. But I can tell you, let me
just for you personally, like what do you think personally?
Yeah, so I think when you are around people who are different than you, I think those barriers are broken down more naturally. You know? So when I'm around someone with a disability, I have my preconceived stereotypes, things like that, but the more I get to know that person as a person, those things begin to fade away. So I think that's true for racial issues, political issues. I just think if you're, in the same room with someone and talking to them and having a meal with them, or in my case, practicing sports with them, those disability things, fall to the wayside. It's not like, oh, you have an intellectual disability, you have autism. You're John who loves tennis like I love tennis. Let's play tennis together. It's that type of a thing. So I think to me that's a big way to help. And just to, I'm sorry, real quick, expanding on that, Special Olympics has kind of a newer program they call Unified Champion School. So several years ago in the 80s, they decided to do unified sports. So imagine a volleyball team with 6 players, 3 have intellectual disabilities and 3 are without disabilities, and they play together in the same team. So it's a really true inclusive setting there. And then they expanded that to say, let's do unified physical education. Let's have children with disabilities go to physical education with children without disabilities. And they expanded even more to say, let's do a unified champion school. This is the idea of breaking down barriers. And they wanted to stop bullying and have children who were sitting in the cafeteria, perhaps by themselves, who have disabilities. If you see someone by themselves, come and sit with them, that type of thing. So they're trying to spread that word across the school. And it wasn't just, it started out specifically for disability, but it became like, if you see another kid being bullied, stop that. If you see a child sitting by themselves in the library, feel free to sit with them. So it became more of a champion school and a school-wide effort. And I think those are types of things that can work. Again, I just think being around people and not being in your own little tribe, as you said, that's going to make it work.
Yeah. What do you think in general about the kinds of barriers that might still exist in our society that we're not maybe thinking about, but barriers to real inclusion of the disabled? I mean, one, maybe it's an obvious one, but we don't necessarily hear always about it. Space, and how space is structured, right? If you don't have ways for people to access a space, obviously that makes it difficult for them to use it. But I'm wondering, just based on your experience, are there other sort of subtle or behind the scene, it's kind of not just necessarily how we act, but just the way things are structured that prevent us from including people with disabilities in our society?
Yeah, I think space is less of an issue with accessibility things and the laws we have in the U.S. compared to other countries. But I think, and I'll be very specific to my field. So I'm physical education, youth sports, that's kind of my area. And right or wrong, people like me who value physical education are very ableistic. We value, as a phys ed teacher, I look around at my 30, 40 kids in class, and I value the kids who are athletic like me. I'm terrible at math. I'm sure that math teacher looked at me and said, I don't value you, but I value that kid who's really good at math, they can do numbers. And phys ed teachers are the same way, youth sports coaches. Let's find that kid who's fast and athletic, and you're not very good, well, I don't value as much. You try not to, but you can't help. So I think that's the big barrier I see for physical education, youth sports, things like that, to get kids included in those things. Some sports programs, some youth sports programs will have a special adaptive program, which is a nice feature. Some will start to include children who are more able, who can participate in sport. But I think that's the mindset of a phys ed teacher, thinking, okay, we're going to be doing this today, and you're not going to be very good at it, so maybe why don't you be off to the side while the other kids do it? Or maybe you can stand here and cheer. That's a mentality from the 40s and 50s. And it's sad for me to go to schools and still see that mentality, but that's
and it sounds like what you're saying, you feel like sometimes you fall into that way of thinking still.
Very easily, yeah. I'm coaching tennis, and even the athletes with disabilities, I have a kind of a hierarchy. You're really good at tennis, even though you have a disability, and you're not very skilled. And so, you know, it's hard to overcome that ableistic attitude, you know. And so that's a challenge. And I think, you know, youth sports coaches, physical education teachers, you know, people who value physical activity and athleticism, that's a challenge to overcome. And again, I've come over the years with I think some great, especially some great ideas for modifications to include, you know, different people and make sure everybody has a chance to be successful. But that mindset, the mindset's the biggest thing. How can I change that mindset?
Some years ago, I read a book that was reflecting on the last week of Jesus's life, and the book pointed out that up until that point, a lot of the verbs in the Bible describing Jesus' life were active, and suddenly they moved into the passive, you know, tense. And the author's point about all of this was that in our society, we tend to value people who are effective or active, right? They can accomplish something. If you're not active, if you're bedridden, for instance, or you're not able to function at the highest capacity, the assumption is you're not worthwhile. You're not valuable. It seems like that's a very deep notion. And the author's point was basically that you can find value even when you're not active by looking to the fact that even Jesus himself went into the passive mode. He was moved around, essentially, and this is clear in the verbs and so on. What about that issue? Have you experienced that sense that, yes, okay, you've got folks with intellectual disabilities playing on special tennis teams or even integrated teams, but in general, there's this sense maybe that, well, what is it that you can accomplish, right? What is it that you can achieve? You're not at the same level, and therefore there's almost like a subtle assumption that the person is not as worthy. Have you experienced that, and if you have, how have you responded to it?
So memories and thoughts flow into my head with this discussion here, but I think the big thing is again, I use the term mindset, but the mindset of setting expectations. So I taught at a special school in Prince William County, and we had children with really significant, severe disabilities who were in wheelchairs, who had very little voluntary movement. And in the afternoon, I coached at it's Stonewall High School. I don't even know what it's called now. It's not called Stonewall High School anymore. But at Stonewall High School in Prince William, and I had a really elite soccer team that went to the state championships. So, I mean, imagine that contrast. And again, when I had the mindset like, you know, John picked his arm up today and was able to push a ball down a ramp, and I was so excited he could do that, and go into the soccer practice where the kids were not doing what I wanted. These elite soccer players made me more angry than this kid who could barely move his arm. So again, that mindset type of a thing. So I think,
in a way, what you're saying there, Marty, is people want to think about what is it that it looks like for this individual person to realize their potential, right? Whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And that's the question that's relevant, not making a comparison between people, but based on where you are at this point in your life, what does it look like for you to actualize your potential? And that's what you're seeking to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you can take a person where they are and move them, you know, an inch forward, that's great. So you have to identify where they are and set those realistic goals there. But you know, going back to the value piece, and I'm not sure if this it'll be okay to say. So I think the value of having a person with a disability around people without disabilities is it also changes the people without disabilities. Let me give you one example. So I was at a school not far from here. I was at Brownsville Elementary School, and they asked me to evaluate a child with a disability, he had autism, to whether he should be in a separate adapted PE class or can he be included. So I went to general PE, and very typically they had 2 classes in there together, so there's 50 kids, and the PE teacher was busy with 50 kids, and he didn't have time to be with this child with autism. And so they were doing this cooperative game. There were little groups of like 5 kids, and this kid was just kind of wandering around. And I didn't know anybody. I just walked into this school, and I went to this little girl. I said, I think Johnny's supposed to be in your group. Can you make sure he's with your group and participates? And she's like, sure. And all of a sudden, her whole group decided to take it upon themselves to help this child. And they were trying to figure out if he doesn't understand it. It was amazing to watch them with no experience, no college training, really embrace this child and take him. And my thoughts in terms of value is when those kids left that class. I mean, what a powerful experience, you know. Go home. How was school today, Mom? Or how was school today, Sarah? You know, I worked with this kid with autism, and we figured out how to get him to do this. It was kind of cool. I mean, wow, that's how you change lives, change attitudes.
Yeah. And I think what you're getting at, Marty, too, is that we all have something to teach each other. Right? There is sometimes this assumption that, well, if you, at least on the surface, have everything that it means to be successful in life, you're abled, you know, you have status and wealth and privilege, that somehow you are the one who is giving from what you have to those who have less, right? There's that mindset. I think that's quite common. But certainly in my life experience, that it's always a two-way street in terms of learning and growth. I'll give you an example. So I'm very torn up by what's going on in Haiti right now. We've been following it, but it's terrible. And I've been to the country a couple of times and worked with folks there and worked at various Episcopal churches in Haiti. And my experience there helped me grow as a Christian from what they taught me, right? The sense of joy, even in the midst of struggle and challenge and difficulty. The not fixating on things that don't really matter. And that sounds strange when you think about a society that's in chaos and people have far less than we do. It's, you know, one of the poorest countries in the world. But it really was and is a two-way street. And I imagine that you probably have experienced a similar thing. I think this is what you're getting at in your work with those with intellectual disabilities, that you have actually become a different and a better person because of it. Yeah. They've taught you something that you didn't have, right? And that's more than just like inclusion and a sense of belonging and, okay, you're part of the group. It's, I need you. Like, we actually need one another to be fully who God calls us to be. Yeah. Do you have an example of something like that?
I mean, I've always said my best teachers are the kids I work with. You know? Yeah. I mean, I can look at a book and I can have a professor tell me stuff. And I feel the same way as a professor. One of the things I really value is getting UVA students out and working with children with disabilities, whether it's school or special Olympics. So I really love it when I get some first-year UVA student who said, yeah, I've never been around Special Olympics, never been around kids with disabilities, but I thought I would try it, and they do it, and, you know, within a couple of weeks, they're just loving it, you know, or a high school kid, or I had a colleague whose daughter came, she was like 12 or 13, and came to Special Olympics and was shy and quiet, and, you know, within 3 weeks, she was, you know, leading warm-up sessions and doing stuff, and that to me is so amazing, that transformation. So yeah, the best teachers are being around the children with disabilities, around the adults with disabilities, and just learning from them, and again, learning how to figure out how to communicate with them. It's just, you know, it's a very joyful experience.
What have they taught? I mean, so it helped you communicate somewhere, but what have they taught you about life, meaning, purpose, the big questions?
Yeah. You know, I think Paul was
not to put you on the spot.
Yeah. You know, Paul, the young man who was asking some questions, he was saying, do I feel like this was a calling, you know, to do this? And it was a little bit of a foreign term to me, and I was mentioning it to my wife the other day, because she's like this amazing special ed teacher. And I said, I'm not sure if we were called to do it. I just think we have we were, I don't know, we were placed in the right place for us. I mean, this was a great math training, someone who loves sports, but also love sharing my love of sports with other people. My wife just has this gift for teaching children with disabilities. So that's made me grow into the person I am. And everything about me is about all the different people I've worked with disabilities. I think that's strengthened me and guided me. And my daughters, the same way. I think, they not quite the same affinity as my wife and I, but they also are very comfortable. I think the big thing is the comfort of being around people with disabilities and valuing that and just it's a level of enjoyment of being around people like that. I call them my friends. They're honestly my friends. I'm so excited to see. We have this young woman with Down syndrome who's probably in her 30s now, but went to Ivy. She must live around here. Went to Murray Elementary School, and she comes to Special Olympics, and she's very limited in her abilities, but just loves coming and loves seeing her. And I light up when I see her. She lights up when she sees us. It's just a great feeling. If she, if I come home and say, yeah, she hit the tennis ball once today out of 10 tries, like she was so excited that one time she hit it. What a great day we had, It's that type of a feeling, Yeah.
Let's open it up to questions. What questions do you have for Marty about Special Olympics or disabilities in general? Yes?
I was just going to ask, when you first got into teaching, how did you come to work specifically with this population? Like, did you seek it out from the start of your career, or did you find your way there through a couple?
So I came from a high-achieving family. My dad worked for the post office department. He was a doctor, and my brothers and sisters. I had this inferiority complex. I was like an outlier. I was not super smart. I was good at sports. That was my thing. So I always wanted to be a phys ed teacher. And I went to school, and my dad and mom were like, you should be a doctor. It's like, Dad, Mom, I don't have that skill set. Not going to happen. Anyway, so to be a phys ed teacher, maybe I can do more. And there was a school for the deaf near where I went to college in Greensboro. I said, maybe I can see if that would be a fun thing to do. Try something different. And so that was my first thing. I loved, absolutely loved it. I had no sign language skills. We would do physical education. I would say, watch me, do it yourself, good job. That was my sign language skills. And so, I was helping. I absolutely loved it. And at the time in Greensboro in the 70s when I went to school, there was special schools. So then there was a special school for kids with intellectual disabilities. Let me try that. Let's see if I could do that. And I did that, and it's like, this is so much fun. It wasn't like, I did it because it was fun, And then there's a school for kids with cerebral palsy. I did that. And so just kept on, and it wasn't challenging myself, just like, this is so much fun. Let's do some more. So that's kind of how it started. I want to be a phys ed teacher. Let me try a little bit more. I understand there are kids with disabilities. Maybe that might be a good match for me. So it was that's kind of how I did that. But starting with the school for the deaf and just having a super positive experience was good for me. Yeah. Thanks.
Yes, Cameron.
In my extended family, there's a 65-year-old who's participated in Special Olympics for 50 years.
Isn't that great?
And his family has been involved. His family's forever grateful for what it is to him. But at age 65, one of the benefits of the program has been his physical fitness. He's not put on weight. He expects to exercise every day. And in the season, when he's training for a match or whatever it would be, he's so easy to live with. So I'd like to speak to the aspect of Special Olympics for years, decades, even for a person, a family, and the health benefits.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing. And Special Olympics over the years have expanded from just pure sports to health and healthy athletes. And so now if you go to a Special Olympics game, for example, in Richmond, they'll provide you free dental care. They have the VCU dental school will go there. They have eye doctors who come and do eye checks. They'll actually work on your teeth, on your eyes, etc., get you glasses. So there's a real big important part. They have exercise programs for athletes. So it's really expanded from just sports. But I love that stories about in season, and he's even more happy to be there. One interesting thing with Special Olympics, we think of in season, our local Special Olympics is a terrific group. In the fall, we have things like soccer and golf. I do volleyball. In the winter, we're bowling, basketball. We're getting ready to do swimming, tennis, and track and field. And typical high school athletes, they start to specialize in one sport. Special Olympics, it's rare. They usually do everything. Whatever season, okay, we're going to do swimming, and now it's time for tennis. And they do everything. So they're always in season. They're always being active because they love it so much. And I love seeing them, in all the different aspects. So, but that's a great story. Thank you.
Yes?
I'm interested in traditional sports. Of course, one of the key elements is winning and losing. In Special Olympics, you would like to think that there are no losers, but yet that's part of sports, is learning how to lose. So how do you approach that?
That's a great question. So a couple things. So Mrs. Shriver chose the credo, I guess, of Special Olympics: let me win. If I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt. And so that every Special Olympics event, they start with all the athletes saying that, let me win. If I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt. So that's one piece of it. She also created something which I think is amazingly clever. So typically, if you go to, let's do a track meet, for example, you have 50 people who are going to do the 50-meter dash. You have multiple heats, and then you get down to the quarterfinals and semifinals, and then you have the final heat, and one person wins gold medal, one person wins the silver, one person wins the bronze, everybody else, good try, it's over. Special Olympics, from the very beginning, adopted this model where every heat is a final heat. So now we have 50 people doing the 50-meter dash. Heat number 1 are all people who run around the same time, and there's 4 people in that heat. Whoever wins gets gold, whoever comes in second, silver, and bronze, and the next person gets a ribbon. The next heat becomes a brand new heat where someone wins gold, silver, bronze. The next heat. So even the slowest person has a chance of getting a medal. So you get many more winners. So does Special Olympics still value winning and losing? And do we understand that? Yes. Do you have to learn about how to fail and how to the heartbreak of losing? Yes, you do. But there are many, many, many more winners in Special Olympics, the way they organized it. And I think I value that, So I was talking, I work out at ACAC, and one of the young women who works there has an intellectual disability, who's a Special Olympian. And we talk whenever I see her about, so she just finished basketball. I said, how did the games go at the state games? Well, we won bronze in my division, which means that, they divided us into these 3 here, and this 3 teams here, and my team here, we got bronze. So, many fewer losers. We still help. I think that's an important part of life, is to understand how to lose and fail. But Special Olympics does it in such a way that there are much fewer losers, Yeah.
Well, what do you think about that as a model for sports in general? Why do we structure non-Special Olympic sports the way that we do? And would that model work in other sports?
Probably not.
Why is that?
I don't know. Our society is so competitive, and you want to have that one winner. It's heartbreaking. I was watching tennis last night. A young woman was playing great and ended up losing. I'm sure it was hard. There are winners and losers. I don't.
Well, it's part of the reason I asked the question too is that let's just take something we've just seen, like the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
Is the team that wins the Super Bowl necessarily the best team? Maybe not. Kind of depends on who you end up playing at various levels, right, in the tournament. Depends on how you're playing at a given time, particular circumstances, and there's so many variables. So in a way, not to sound too provocative, but in a way, the notion that just because you win a single game, right, or a single competition, that you've somehow shown that you're number one, is sort of a fiction, actually. Whereas what you're talking about here, it's testing how people are all doing together at a particular moment. And there's still going to be winners and losers in that.
Right.
But it takes out a lot of the variables that we have in other sports. Anyway, that's just a
Yeah.
wondering. Your comment prompted it me.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think from a coach's standpoint, the good coaches have that mindset. So we lost today, but let's reflect on some of the positives we did. You know, last time we played this team, we lost by 30. Today, we that type of thing. We passed the ball. We did all these things and better. My first coaching job, I coached middle school girls up in Prince William County, and how do you, in basketball, how do you not score? My team didn't score. I lost 40-0. You know, so how do you find positives in that? But we played that same team a month later, and we lost 12-2. And I said to my girls, I said, what an unbelievable positive change. We scored 2 points. That's a big. But we didn't lose by 40, you know. So I think that's the great coaches have that mindset. Like, okay, we competed today. We did this today. We did, you know. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's it. But if, you know, the idea of structuring other sports like Special Olympics, I'm not sure if our country would.
Oh, I don't know if our country would go for it. Yeah, just wondering if an argument could be made for it. Not that anyone would accept it. All right. Any other questions? Yes, Amy.
People with developmental disabilities are much higher rates of developing dementia and Alzheimer's later in life. And I'm just wondering from a research perspective if you're aware, or maybe even participate in any longitudinal studies that focus on, this was prompted by the comment that my fellow parishioner shared. I'm wondering if it's been studied if the health benefits and maybe preventative benefits of long-term physical activity for people with developmental disabilities has been shown to, you know, prolong the onset of some of these cognitive degenerative diseases later in life. And later in life, I even mean over 35, because that's really when the risk shoots up for these folks with developmental disabilities.
That's a great question. I know there's a relationship with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's and dementia. So I haven't seen any research on that. I know there's lots of research on health benefits for people without disabilities and just preventative by being physically active. And you'd think it'd have to be the same for people with disabilities, but I haven't seen that. You know, and Special Olympics has so many arms and different things. I wouldn't be surprised if they're studying some of those healthy benefits of being active and preventing these things. So it's a great question, but I haven't seen literature on that. Thanks. Yeah.
Any other questions for Marty? Marty, thank you for joining us today. We'll give him a round of applause. I'm sure you'll stay around a little bit if anyone has any follow-ups. All right. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you.